Hello, everyone. Welcome to Outside Light, Vast and Intimate. My name is Elizabeth Rangard, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for the IALD. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to go over some housekeeping. Attendees' microphones will be muted for the duration of the session. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the questions box. We will take speaker questions at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical issues, please put them in the chat function and an IALD staff member will respond to you privately. This session will be recorded and available after the conference. Please keep your video off and your microphones muted. We want to offer a special thank you to the Lighting Quotient, makers of Elliptipart and Tambient, for sponsoring this segment. They believe lighting professionals have an obligation to do their part in the fight against COVID-19. They recently released the S151 outdoor linear wall washer, as well as the G305 germicidal fixture with UVC for desktop disinfection. This webinar qualifies for continuing education credit. The AIA will award 1 learning unit for attending the entire live presentation. The webinar may also qualify for continuing education credit for the CLD and LC, both of which are self-evaluated and self-reported. Contact Teresa at iald.org to request a certificate of completion. A fascination with theater led our speaker today, Charles Stone, to a career in architectural lighting design, joining FMS in 1983, where he became president in 2003. Charles has led design teams on award-winning projects such as Carnegie Hall, the Washington Monument, and the Hong Kong Airport, to name just a few. Since 2003, his traveling light speaking tour has visited 22 countries. Charles is a fellow and a past president of the IALD. Welcome, Charles.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Charles Stone. I'm the president of Fisher Moran Stone. We have studios in New York and Seattle, but now we're all over the country. I'm going to talk to you today about light outside. This is the 10th talk in my Traveling Light series, and the idea is something that has evolved over the last 6 months as we've all been locked down, and so it's come together as in a couple of intersections that I want to talk to you about. Anyway, without further ado, let me go up into the corner and share my screen. Outside light, vast and intimate. Well, the premise for the talk is that when we emerge from COVID, things will be different. And we've all finished talking about the workspace and how the desk arrangements will be different. And so I guess 2 months ago or so, I started really thinking that there was something more here about how it would impact our profession and my practice and my career, and what we would do in the positive to bring positive energy from this. And so first we would fly together to Palm Springs. I don't know about you, but I came in yesterday, and welcome to Palm Springs. I had plans, by the way. They're great modernists, all of whom built houses when I was, from the time I was born and time I was a little boy. The Elrod House is a prominent house. You may recognize it if you're a James Bond fan from 1971, Diamonds Are Forever. Twin Palms by Stuart Williams that's on the far right. That was Frank Sinatra's first house that he commissioned for himself, and also Williams' first project in 1947. And lower left is the House of Tomorrow, notable by Palmer and Kreisel in 1960, but that's where Elvis and Priscilla spent their honeymoon. And then in the bottom center is Bob Hope's house that he had commissioned. It's huge, 24,000 square feet. It's another John Lautner. And the Kaufman House is a Richard Neutra house. It's a classic and important architecturally because 10 years earlier, Kaufman is the shopping center guy who commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright to do Falling Water near Pittsburgh. Anyway, none of that actually happened, did it? Nor did I have cocktails at sunset with a bunch of you. But we'll get back to that. Instead, I'm here, and so are you, in the equivalent. Over the summer, my hobby was to try to improve my audio and video. Okay, now what? Well, this is what we do all day. These are my partners. I don't think they'll be too happy to have their pictures up for too long, but come on, everybody watching me now, you've been spending the day doing this, and the limitations of the two-dimensional are now kind of getting baked into the way we're thinking about work. This is an interesting challenge. And it's all because of the bug. The bug came, and where are we going to find the positives from this? Well, I was fortunate the week before the lockdowns to be traveling, so I didn't immediately get plunged into this kind of melancholy that overtakes us all every week. Instead, I went in my car through the redwoods with my wife and took pictures like this. And it's worth considering that here I am intimately in the forest in the vastness of the trees, and they were standing long before the bug got here, and they'll be here after it's gone. And I really think that the privilege and kind of the joy I've had to go around the world and be in the presence of great natural beauty as well as architecture is giving me some strength, because when I consider the dynamic range from daylight at all hours to darkness, I think there's some power in this to remember our obligation and responsibility as lighting designers to be ready for our clients, because they're going to want to change the way that buildings are designed and built and used to satisfy users who want to be outside more. They want to be outside because it's healthier, because we're less likely to be infected with the next bug or this one, and because we've now gained, at least in this time we're living in, a new appreciation, because we're spending our evenings inside, probably not in the dinner party setting in the lower left. But this is a slide from my collection when I talk about hygge, that Danish word for comfort and coziness. And admit it, there are some wonderful times in this lockdown where you have had this very intimate experience. And we mustn't forget that. There's certain value in that. We don't have time to we don't have to spend the time commuting. We have the time for other things. What are we doing with that time? And after months and months, you realize you really can't work that many hours, and you ought to do good things with the time. I'll admit to spending some amount of time with a candle in contemplation, perhaps praying, thinking about what happens next. And I have found myself thinking about this question of dynamic range in our art, in our science, in our craft. And that has been quite interesting, the kind of duality of that, to witness vast and intimate at the same time. Now, that requires some mental gymnastics to balance the two. You want to be in the presence of both, and in fact, there's a great deal of guidance and consideration in how we bring electric light into the outside, not just a fire, but also all kinds of lighting into the outside realm, and guidance for how to do that and do it properly and do it better after the time of the virus is a worthy thing to think about, and to balance that with our longing for vastness as well. Well, I have another story to tell you, because it seems that by coincidence, really, truly, 4 years ago, Nancy Clanton, who many of you know, and we met almost 40 years ago, and we served on a panel together. That's a long time. And of course, she is now regarded as one of the great experts in lighting, particularly the technical aspects. She knows a lot more about this stuff than I do some days. I think everything she knows is more than I know. But we put a committee together. But she came to me first. She said, she called me and she said, we're going to have a committee. Would you serve on it? At that point, I don't think she was sure she wanted to be on it. But instead of talking us out of being on the committee, I said, well, I'll be on it if you're the chair. So she chairs this committee, which is called the Lighting for Outdoor Pedestrian Spaces Committee. And our work, which will be available soon, is in the form of a LP2 and RP44. RP44 is quite important because it updates using all the latest science and research and the way buildings are built and the way people are behaving outside. Application-specific recommended practice. I'm not going to share with you any criteria tables today. I'll leave that to Nancy and others on the committee when they make their presentations. But of course, the first thing we had to decide is what is a pedestrian? It's a Latin word. And we determined that it does mean walking, jogging, running, riding a bicycle, skateboard, scooters. And it also includes all those people having dinner and drinks in the cafe. So any place a vehicle doesn't go is in the realm of the LOPS committee, the Lighting for Outdoor Pedestrian Spaces. So bringing this science and the new thinking and current best practice into a set of recommendations that will be published in 2021, I suppose. I don't know the exact date of release. But of course, we are all, some of you have this, some version of this slide, the dynamic white in nature as a natural, it is a natural process. We evolved under it. Our sensitivity and awareness of this circadian rhythm then goes to our understanding of what that means to our bodies, to our minds actually, when we are most alert, when we are strongest, blood pressure, all the things about the body. And of course, the ever popular melatonin story in the afternoon and evening. So whatever lighting recommendations we would make for pedestrians as we define them would take this into account, as well as the latest thinking about how to actually state metrics. So we study now photopic, scotopic, and melanopic weightings in the light that reaches us. And so what would we do to make it practical and specifiable to control those spectrums at night? Well, it turns out that's a big problem, as many of you understand. We don't have a common metric. Lots of people smarter than I am are battling it out. They're arm wrestling, and let's see, this is Naomi Miller's slide. She says CCT is a poor metric. It's the best we have until the eggheads finish duking it out. I love that. But of course, the general recommendation outside is 3,000 Kelvin or below. So we're going to use CCT as the metric for the time being, and that's what's going to be promulgated in this standard. Other considerations, we're all used to this lighting zones categorization now. You have it in LEED system. It's easy to understand, even on one slide where you have no light, you see the sky, and my cascade of images there shows you as you go all the way to very high ambient light. There's the Bortle dark sky scale, which you can learn about, and it's great fun. There are metrics attached to this of luminance, and this gives you an idea. You know, I want to spend some time over there in number one in the dark sky, and I don't mind spending some time in the inner city. And we can also have a good debate about what's appropriate in a city, which the LZ system seeks to do. So how do you control that? There is TM15, which sets forth backlight, uplight, and glare, the bug rating of light fixtures, particularly street lights, to help you be responsible in your design and specifications with regard to optical control. So at the extreme end, it's just you alone in the night sky, and there's nothing else. And as you move along this kind of continuum outside, well, my favorite place to stop at first would be the traditional Japanese side street. This is in Kyoto. Go there and walk these streets at night, and the warm lanterns. You have all the goodness that you want in the outside world, and you feel safe, and you feel happy. You feel joy. You also feel the same in different ways, the same happiness and excitement, of course, when you look at the Pudong in Shanghai, which is LZ4. There's a light everywhere they can put a light until about 11 or 12 at night when it goes off. If you haven't done so, I recommend the boat ride to see it all, because all this light is moving. Anyway, this committee developed a list of bullet points, you might say, which become kind of chapters in our RP about design considerations. And to those who have been practicing any period of time, this should all be quite familiar. There was a document called GG5 in the 80s or 90s, which was about outdoor lighting. And one of the reasons our committee existed was to update that. But if you look at these bullet points, atmosphere and enjoyment, terrain, object safety, reassurance, which goes to personal safety and feeling safe, orientation and wayfinding, hierarchy and context in the nighttime environment. That context refers to community context, which is there in the last line, defining community goals and themes. These are all intertwined. In fact, one of the big challenges we had as a committee is how do you pull this apart and make sense of it? Well, you've all heard of the food triangle, the food pyramid. Well, we have the transformation of our considerations into the design process triangle or pyramid. So joy, enjoy, atmosphere is on top, and zonal planning is a kind of base it rests upon the community. And of course, this is surrounded by the idea of budget. But frankly, I think as we come out of the time of the virus, our clients are going to put more money into the exterior. Those pretty renderings with the cafes drawn all around the corporate podium level, they're not going to be cut in value engineering. They're going to be built. We're going to have outside conference rooms, the doors that rotate, all those things you can imagine that you've seen on drawings. Well, now we're really going to have them. So we're going to need to pay a lot more attention to the whole external realm. Now, if we were going to examine this, and we have a portfolio, a legacy, a body of experience, as so many of you do who are watching, how do we use what we know? Well, I'm going to set forth for you a scaled presentation of this, which touches on our process along the way. And when I say our, I mean really all designers. So you start at the home. Remember the picture of the warm hygge, the candlelit interiors. Well, this Legaretta house in Hawaii is all about home and comfort and warmth. Or John Hara's house on Diamond Head is quite modest considering the value of the real estate. And the ordinariness of the exterior lighting is exactly what the architect wants to claim the ground as personal, intimate space. More modern expressions like this Lake Plato house in Colorado, where you really start to now do what I think we'll see a lot of, which is outside meeting inside and blurring where the two meet, or at least the sheet of glass is less of a barrier, certainly not a barrier for light, and only a barrier for climate. Or the more modernist, classic modernism, where you've got the floor-to-ceiling glass and you are laying your house into a landscape in a way that it's connected to the outside. I can see you can sort of in the blink of an eye transfer the residential ideas here into a corporate inside-outside conference space, if you will. Well, what happens next is the people who live in those houses want to go on trips, like to places like Palm Springs, and they want to stay in hotels that remind them of home or extend home or bring the best parts of home. So we've got the green things and the warm things and the light close by and intimate and cozy, as well as a feeling of placemaking, which becomes quite important in exterior lighting of all kinds and anywhere the pedestrian goes. Considering the fact that almost everything we do as a pedestrian is just simply an act of being human. I mean, we talk about it being not where cars are, but you can sleep in the back seat of the car. So anyway, back to Mauna Kea on the Big Island of Hawaii, where you have not only the intimacy of the high contrast lighting of the plantings, but you also have wayfinding and placemaking and celebration of the modern architecture of Bunshaft. So take me to Rome anytime. Piazza Navone, go around the corner to the Hotel Raphael and you are invited into a vertical garden. I recommend it. So this kind of expression of light is exactly the kind of outside light that is going to appeal to clients. If you step up the next level and go to a municipal setting, here we are in St. Louis, a project that we did with Randy Burkett. Randy did the art lighting. We did the hard and softscape. And here we have so many things coming together. The highlight of art, the context in the city, the things we've been speaking about in terms of joy and atmosphere. And when you just go 50 meters away from that spot and walk along the path here, principles of wayfinding, certainly the context of the arch. And by the way, before there was a bug rating, there were house-side shields which prevent the streetlights from lighting into the park, which lowered our baseline of light so that we had a lower starting point when we added light to art or landscape. As we did all around this part, I can't remember the number of art pieces, but there are dozens of them. It's 9 acres of park. And this kind of placemaking activity where you extend outside, here at the Brockstein Pavilion, you see this writ large, where the Tuileries-style pebbles and tables and chairs under these pleached trees give you senses of almost rooms outside. This can be formalized as at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where you have the alley of trees. Now you have formal expression outside. We're scaling up. And it's not inviting you to slow down to the intimate. Now we're getting bigger. This happens also as you use light as an attraction, as it becomes the thing that attracts. So this is a bandshell, actually, that can be any color, of course. But we do like blue, certain blues. And that can be shown as an example here in Seattle at the City Hall, where that red wall is such an iconic part of the block and organizes the exterior. So it becomes in itself a very powerful invitation. Those doors swing open, as you see. Another example along the canal that runs through Indianapolis. It's so interesting because as you pick points of interest, many bridges and other artifacts, including memorials, and light them, then you start to mark your way. It's more than wayfinding. It actually becomes a path, a destination-to-destination experience outside. And this kind of drawing you out of the office environment into an exterior world that animates you is, I think, a great example of what we'll see more of as well. And sometimes these are just events that arrest you and capture your imagination, where light and water, in this case, blend together at this one spot along the San Pedro Creek, which is a completely new development, another giant hydraulic project in San Antonio. You're familiar with the river? Well, this is San Pedro Creek. You should go. Now, there's nothing new about this idea, and that's why I think we have to refer to our own legacy, our own portfolios, to find clues for what's going to be sought after by our clients. Here we have really the woods are inside the building. This is the Ford Foundation. 51 years ago or 52 years ago, it opened, and we participated in a renovation that opened 50 years later. You see it for yourself. The light is to make it possible for you to safely navigate through the woods. And it's a fantastic place for a cocktail party. We went to the opening. And copying that idea or extending it into other kinds of architecture, this is a healing garden in Boston at Dana-Farber. And you see those big black circles in the ceiling. Well, they are semi-hiding theatrical pattern projectors that turn this into a magical evening. So we're trying to animate the forest at night as we brought it inside. So outside, inside, inside, outside, I think will be a theme we see more of. Indeed, this is not about greenery. Here, the line between the hospital entrance and the street and sidewalk is completely blurred. You see that guy sitting on the bench. Is he in or out of the lobby? It's intended that way. You see the big planks of glass, and you see the infrared heaters on underneath the roof at the porte cochere. But I think this is a wonderful example of what we'll see more and more of, where inside and outside the line is blurred to the great extent possible, so people can wait outside when the weather allows. And you'll see that extended. I wonder, this was finished, I suppose, a year and a half or 2 years ago. What would be added to it if they were doing it today? Think about that. Would there be trellis and heat lamps? Would there be additional a way to sit outside in the rain in some areas? I don't know, but this is the kind of corporate courtyard which has become popular, and I think will be ever more popular. Here in an academic setting is quite similar, where you have an old building and a new building, a renovation by Kieran Timberlake, where you have a really interesting plaza created. Indeed, there are some projects, and this has just come online a year ago, where it seems to have, at first we thought, oh God, what a disaster that the COVID has come now. But in fact, I think this is exactly the kind of project we're going to see more and more of. And the Waterfront Park and these two remarkable pieces of art by artist Larry Kirkland make this a destination and add a whole new dimension to what you can do in a landscape. So you can see the cafes along the side of the buildings. This development includes offices and some residence and commercial buildings, shops, and of course restaurants and cafes. And you have in the near ground the Columbia River. It's a didactic piece of art, anthropological, archaeological, geological, and then beyond is the pier, which you may be more familiar with. And here you see on the pier, you can walk along, and the way it's lighted, the view is preserved. So you can have the intimate experience on the walkway and the vast experience of sunset across the Columbia River. That's not bad. And this is the kind of thing I think we need to be very aware of. The Theater for the New Audience is an example of where the lighting is a kind of core, but it's like a pillar in the middle of the exterior expression, which is in itself very strong. So you see lighting in the plaza. So at an intermission or before and after the show is a great place for gathering. Other chapel, religious or artistic, cultural buildings can do this kind of thing. And so can some commercial, where the central event has kind of tentacles or things that give guidance to you on how to get there visually as well as physically to navigate wayfinding. The Bridge Golf Club, sitting all alone out in the middle of a big open space, shows you the power of light in that condition to illuminate and to become iconic. Now, the way I see this developing is in a project that had its beginnings more than 10 years ago in Maui at the Arts and Cultural Center, where this pavilion, well, on opening week, they had Elton John and they've had string quartets and everything in between. And there 5,000 people can sit in the green arena space formed. So you're inside and outside with a full facility. And of course, the pyramid of the roof glows. There are examples of museums, especially, and other cultural institutions, academic institutions, that have made good use of this idea that you can extend, perhaps double your interior space by carefully planned courtyards with lighting. An example of a very small project, which looks a lot bigger in every picture you take because of the reflections on the water. And this is not lost on corporate clients. We will see more renovations like this, where the old landscape, which was more designed to hide or privatize the project, is now opened up and flattened and given all these attributes from the bullet points for wayfinding, for safety, for placemaking. And you see that in various corporate projects. This one, which is already 15 years old, at the time, I think it's quite interesting. The lobby paving comes all the way out into the landscape, and then it tapers away as you get into the greenscape. And you have clear paths to the adjacent buildings. So this is an example. I think this is as successful today as when it opened. And it's an example of the principles that we're now coming to see will be so important. Embry-Brittle opened just last year. And again, you see on this site the claiming of the site by the use of the site pole. You've all done that, but I think an awareness of its value is now heightened. My favorite example of this are these two projects 15 years apart when we renovated the exterior lighting of the Washington Monument. You can see all those little step light things, and you can see how they trail along for safety and wayfinding. At night, it's really your only light out in this, many, many hectares here. And then more recently, the completed National Museum of African American History and Culture, where claiming the site there is a matter of blending this landscape into the site. And in both cases, these monuments stand in concert with the other memorials and monuments on the mall. So attention to vertical brightness as well as all of the pedestrian elements all have to be in balance. Now, the tallest building in the world would, in fact, without all of that surrounding treatment of light and action and activity and water, be a pile of rock that would be the tallest in the world. But I don't think it's powerful. If you visited and experienced it, you see the power of the simple lighting solution on the balconies and the ever-expanding concentric, almost, when you study it, rings and partial rings of light that radiate in the site. And sometimes it's not vertical but horizontal. So in the department of context and community, I think one of the most interesting challenges when I think about this philosophically really is for an American in Paris. Here we are trying to light an old building in the city of light. And, oh boy, this is the rising LED, and it's a high-pressure sodium town at that point. And how do we do the right thing so that we celebrate the architecture, and we'd rather be copied than looked down upon. So to get this right was quite important in so many ways. And of course, down at the street level, it's all about wayfinding and safety, as well as making it elegant and beautiful and sparkling and full of joy. But I love this picture because of the wow factor of getting the old building just right. So remember this transformed considerations, because I think the ideas are old. They're not new, but organizing them and organizing the new science with them has been very interesting. And how that can support my thesis that we're going to be very busy coming out of COVID with new requests. And how do we start doing that? Well, again, I look back in the archives and I find the old concept sketch and remember how important it is to go from concept to reality and hang on to that concept and make sure that whatever you end up with is true to your school, be true to your ideas. And that, I'll give a couple of examples here. My most recent one really is this year-long experience on the Bund in Shanghai, where we arrived to see this. If you look closely, you'll see a mashup of high-pressure sodium, of different kinds of sodium, high-pressure metal halide, and different kinds of sodium, high-pressure sodium, and LEDs starting to be retrofitted. At that time, in the beginning, they wanted the LEDs to match the sodium because everybody was used to the golden light. Just like the occasional controversy over new street lights being too cool, well, that was a theme here in Shanghai. So when we looked at the two main buildings, which you see there in the left center of the Bund, how do we treat them and what whites do we use? This is a whole nother story of tunable white. My point here is that we developed a concept which is true to these principles, even dark skies. We tried very much to maintain cutoffs and put the light on the buildings and don't throw the rest away into the sky, baffle it off. And to a large extent, I think we achieved that. More so than the thing about LEDs is you have all this beam efficiency. So you naturally, because of the physics of the instrument, you're going to have a little less pollution, more than a little, than you would with old sources and big reflectors. So that it's not that you get it for free, but it's a positive attribute. And so the Bund today looks quite different. The buildings are celebrated. I hope they don't notice the lighting. They're supposed to notice the buildings. And you can see at the extreme upper right of this photograph, where it's still sodium, what a difference we did make. And I'm very proud of the result. And it is true to the principles in the design process pyramid. And since it was being developed in all the learning I was doing at the LOPS committee, it's so interesting to me that it was consistent. And if I go back even farther, if I go back to the 9/11 Memorial Days, design days, if you look at a plan, you'll recognize the two footprints of the towers, and which are now, of course, the waterfall fountains of remembrance. And if you look at what we did to prove to all the constituents that the lighting was all the things on that list, and security had a big seat at the table. So 1 foot candle, horizontal and vertical. And if you read the notes here, it's above grade. We wanted to light faces. Now this is a different take from what we've taken in the RP. This is so hard to do and complicated and frankly expensive and time consuming. And also there are a lot of variables, what happens when the trees grow. But I find it very interesting because of the process. it's a process that hasn't changed that much. The design process itself, it's just the input we have. And so when we come out of this COVID, we're going to do these same processes. And here you see the light column, which of course is providing a lot of vertical illumination. Today we'd call this a smart pole, but in 2009 we didn't call it a smart pole yet. I assume many of you have been there and walked about. The day to do that is at the end. The time to do that is at the end of the day, and on one particular day, if you can manage to be there when the tribute in light is on, that's very good, and quite moving, and everything's in balance. So those cigarette poles do not form a major impression when you are faced with 30-foot high, 10-meter tall waterfalls that are blowing in the wind. And in the context of very tall buildings, you're standing with your back now to some very tall buildings, and the Calatrava hub station, the transportation hub, is right behind you. This is the bird that has landed, and in itself it has a transparency and a yearning to be open to the outside. And when we conceived this, it was white and all white light. You may see pictures now which are not, but please don't call me about those. But now we come back to this timeline and this the scale I was building from intimate to vast. I can think of no more vast lighting effect than the tribute in light, and I can step back and scale and appreciate that and stand in awe and wonder of it. And if I'm up close to it, and one of our partners took this picture a couple of years ago, so if you could be on the street, come out from a restaurant and look up and see this, and it's quite powerful. You've had the intimacy of dinner with friends, and you come out and see the towers of light. So this balancing of an understanding of intimate and vast, I think, will be a new part of how we deal with clients and their request to go outside with more of their buildings. As the architecture goes more outside, transparency, attachment, flow to and from the inside to the outside. Well, the intimate and the vast. And I think this is my favorite example of this in our portfolio. The red steps, and maybe some of you are in this picture, and you could be sitting there having an intimate conversation, and you are in the vast cacophony of New York City, Times Square. And this is something I hope we will see again very soon. And I think we'll go outside together and light outside. So thank you very much. I hope I've given you something to think about as you balance these two ideas of the vast and the intimate, and consider how we're going to serve our clients and community as we come out of the time of the virus. So thanks very much. Good afternoon.
Hello, thanks, Charles. We have some questions from the audience here. As the line between inside and outside is blurred, what accommodations, if any, do you have to make for extreme weather? Or how can you create an inviting outdoor space where it's extremely hot or extremely cold?
Well, I don't know if that's the lighting designer's problem. It's a good question. New York is about to deal with that right now as they figure out how all this outdoor dining will continue. I don't know. I think these the examples, and there were two or three in the slides of the center rotating vertical doors, and architects will have other tricks. I don't think we have to solve that problem. We'll just be there to see what they do.
Okay. What are some of your biggest challenges in creating an intimate outdoor setting?
Well, that one I like. That question I like. Well, there are a lot of things to balance at the same time. You get to give a presentation like this, and I only said the word budget once, and I think a real awareness of the dynamic range is probably the key thing. That how much light you need to be up close as the sun sets and in the evening, and an inside space versus what's available outside at the same in the same period of time passing, and dealing with things like unwanted streetlight glare. How many times have you sat in the restaurant and there's a streetlight outside the window? I always put my back to the window in those cases. So that question gets into, I think, experience and being aware of all these variables, and the skill of the lighting designer in convincing the architect to provide the right apertures as well. I'll leave it at
Well,
that.
we have another question that leads off of that quite well. How have your ideas changed about outdoor lighting over the years?
Oh, well, that I like that question too. I put that whole thing about the LOPS committee in there because I learned so much in being on the committee. I think although the example at the Ground Zero World Trade Center site involved a lot of technical, and there have been other technical exercises we've done that on big outside plazas. I think there's far more inputs now, parameters, if you will, that we'll have to consider going forward, and that's a big change for me personally, because looking pretty is not enough. You're not, and it's in the RFPs from the clients. I'm dealing with some right now where all this talk of LEED and well is no longer just talk. They're actually requirements in the RFPs that are requiring you to demonstrate a knowledge and understanding of how that'll be applied, not just inside, but outside too. So that's a good question.
We have another one here. Today's conference, we've been asking a lot of people about what inspires them. And I guess we'd like to hear from you. What inspires you?
Well, I had to get wound up to do this talk, and they always inspire me because if it isn't genuine, it isn't any good. So this one really, I like doing it, and that inspired me because it required some real deep analysis. I had to reflect on what I had learned and all the other stuff that we're all dealing with, which is why the preface, my introduction, is what it was. So I've got some others in my mind, and I'd encourage everyone to, use the time. Think of all the time we're not sitting in the airplane. Well, we are sitting in this seat, and I'm wondering if someone will, maybe United Airlines will get me one of their seats for my computer desk. Okay, next one.
All right. How do you see your work changing post these COVID times? What are your observations and learnings? What would you like to change?
Well, my observations are that geographically, we should not anticipate that it will come back in the same proportions as before. In other words, if you were doing half of your work in New York before, you might not be. If you're the same size, you may not be doing as much work in New York after. Maybe not for quite a few years. But I think you're asking other things as well. I think there's going to be shakeouts in manufacturers. There are going to be new sources. It's a wonderful time to retire the old machines if you're a manufacturer. So there'll be a lot that's new. In addition to the things I talked about here, which at times are whimsy or philosophical, I think there will be direct impacts on what tools we have and how we practice that I can't really predict, but I get inklings of them geographically. Which countries have the money? They're going to be building the big jobs, etc.
All right, we have another one here. I love the way we can talk about vast and intimate amongst each other. Do you find it difficult to express these ideas to a client using the same inspiring language?
Nope. Don't find it difficult at all.
A lot of times we talk with each other. I've heard that from lighting designers.
Right.
We all get excited about it. How do you get the clients and how do you get your other partners excited about it?
Anybody that has a drink at the bar with me knows that I worry about that. And I scan through the list. I know maybe half of the people on the call, I already know you. And we are concerned about that. Yes, it's fun to talk to each other about it, and I find it rewarding and inspiring, and friendships are real. Uh, but we haven't hired each other very often. So I think the enthusiasm that I gained from such a conference, I take right out there in the world. I have no fear about it. That's my recommendation, I guess.
All right, we have another one here. How important are smaller human scale applications versus vast lighting applications in urban spaces? Do you layer their experience of spaces from vast to intimate as you develop concepts?
I think the answer is in the question. Well, everything you do is up close and personal. Here we are in front of we're at home. I've got a light over here and I've got a light over here. And you saw the picture of my setup. Um, so that's all quite up close and personal. And isn't it no different when you're in a huge park? Your eyes to see where you put your foot next. So I think the answer is built into the question. Of course, it's always both. That's what the balancing act is. The client is never impressed by the fact that he or she can read the map. The client wants to be impressed by the big view. So you must have both. That was the hidden lesson. Nobody asked me the. Nobody has asked about the pyramid in Portuguese. Well, I gave a similar version of this talk with a completely different front end, if you will. It's not for another week in Brazil, and of course I got the Portuguese food pyramid. So the observers of every slide would have seen the Portuguese flyby, because I realized as I was recording this, whoops, I forgot to swap back in the English version of the food pyramid. That was the extra credit point.
I didn't see any questions about that. I think people were visual. So. Speaking of the pyramid, can you tell us a little bit more about the committee and the work that you're doing there?
Well, I
And
think we're
is it
well. I don't know if we're finished, but we're almost finished. The IES is very rigorous in its in how you constitute committees and the work that they do and the review process. And I'm not the expert in the whole timeline, but we've been meeting for 3 years, looking at drafts, gathering material. A lot of everybody's name that I mentioned is on the committee, including some others that I see on the participants list here: Chip Israel, Steve Fodios in England, and of course I mentioned Naomi and Randy Burkett, and of course Nancy's the chair, and there are others. The group is, I don't remember how many, but we've been working on it a long time and trying to make sure we don't. It's not prescriptive; it's guidance, and that it's got to be inclusive in the broadest sense of that word.
all right? We have another question from a young lighting designer. Can you give advice to young lighting designers to grow up as they want to become a great designer?
Well, I hope you don't finish growing up. Uh, I'm working on it. Um, well, I was asked this question by the IALD. Marcia asked us to give these thoughts. I think it was last year in Albuquerque, and I'm sticking by my answer then, which is identify the best and go work for them, and learn from people who know and have the most experience. That's probably that's key advice. Don't finish growing up. That's bad. Don't finish growing up. That's other advice. And learn a lot. Keep getting all those things after your name. Do that stuff. I've got a couple more to go. I'm not done yet.
Great. We have a couple more questions here, and we have time for maybe one or two more. Um, This one is, how has your design solution changed with awareness of light effect on the environment, wildlife, birds,
Oh
etc.?
yeah, that's one of the considerations, indeed, in the committee, in the LOPS committee. Um, we chose LOPS as an acronym because it's so much fun to say. By the way, uh, all wildlife, not just birds. Um what do humans need? What's best for humans? Turns out, what's best for humans is probably what's best for wildlife. Um, So yes, that's part of it. I touched on it there with thinking about melanopic weightings of the energy, melanopic energy and light sources. And so I think that a decade from now, maybe another committee will have to wrestle with the data when we have enough science to understand and specify.
All right. I think we have time for one last question. This
Okay.
is rather open-ended, but how do you think or predict our profession will evolve now? With
Oh,
COVID, with all the changes going on in manufacturing,
right.
budgets?
Well, if you know the answer, would you please call me? Uh, it's a good question, and of course, this talk today was an attempt to answer that question in part and to have some fun with the question. Um, I wish I knew all of the practical economic design. I don't know those things. Uh, I really, your guess is good as mine, perhaps. But I think that thinking as we have been doing here together, if you've stayed with me in this set of ideas, is going to be part of it, and that will be different. And I think you'll see it in what your clients are going to want to do will be different. They're going to take us outside, and they'll do other things too. Uh, so I think that's the way I'm going to answer that question. If you know other things, would you please call me? I'd like to know. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Charles. I'm going to quote an audience member who said, "Thank you. This was inspiring and refreshing."
That's great. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Signing off.